Functions of behavior. All behavior has a function. This is getting at the why of the behavior. How does the behavior pay off for the individual? What does the behavior get them? These are questions I ask as an analyst to try to figure out what the function of a behavior is. Also, as an analyst, I've learned to stay away from the term maladaptive. Most behavior is adaptive after all. It may be not appropriate, but it certainly is adaptive. What I mean by that is if a patient screams and they get to play Minecraft, their screaming is not maladaptive. It gets them what they want. Yes, it may not be appropriate, but you can't say it's maladaptive either, because it gets them what they want. It's communicating a need. We all do things to get what we want, access favored or desired items. Mostly, we do this through socially appropriate ways, such as asking or buying something. Individuals with developmental delays, such as autism, or individuals with behavior issues, do engage in several problem behaviors. Of course, some of us as adults engage in lots of problem behaviors as well. The point, though, is that when we do this, or when individuals with these delays or developmental disabilities, they're often doing these things, just like us, to gain access to things, or just like everyone else. They are to gain access to attention, to items, to escaping things, or just making themselves feel better. So, if someone is engaging in a problem behavior, it is most likely to get a need or a want met. Again, if you're engaging or someone is engaging in a problem behavior, it is most likely that they want to get a need or a want met. Likewise, we can use this to our advantage. If we want them to engage in a good behavior, we have to make it functional for them. Now, there are four main functions in applied behavior analysis. These are attention, both positive and negative, escape avoidance, access to items or activities, and automatic or sensory. Attention. This means the person gets some form of social attention. It can be positive or negative. Remember that negative attention is still attention. It doesn't even need to be verbal. The person may be looking for a response that says you notice them. A raised eyebrow, a flinch, a nod of the head. Here, the person is positively reinforced. They receive attention for the behavior. Attention is added. So again, the first function of the behavior is attention. This is some form of social response for the behavior. It can be positive or negative attention. Again, we can use this to our advantage. This is why, when a person engages in the desired behavior or the target behavior, we acknowledge it by saying good job, or maybe nodding our head yes. Likewise, if we know the person is getting attention, and that's why they're engaging in problem behavior, we know that we can ignore it. The second function I want to talk about is escape or avoidance. Escaping a task or avoiding it. Getting rid of something aversive. Getting away from something. Sometimes, if I don't want to be bothered at work, or if I don't want to be bothered, and my phone rings, I will turn it off. This is escape or avoidance behavior. The person is reinforced through negative reinforcement. They remove something they don't want to through escape. So they engage in behaviors to get rid of that item. So remember, like the alarm clock example. If your alarm clock is going off, you hit snooze. This is to get rid of that annoying alarm going off. The third function I want to talk about is access to tangibles. This means the person is getting a favorite item, gaining access to a favorite toy, gaining access to an activity. The person is reinforced through positive reinforcement. They receive something, such as a toy or an item. Automatic or sensory. This meets some sort of sensory need for the individual. It feels good. This is where you get that idea of stereopathy, repetitive behavior such as hand flapping. Remember, we all engage in sensory behaviors. We all twirl our thumbs sometimes. Some of us all play with our hair. I shake my foot back and forth. But we do it in a socially appropriate way. And remember, one of the deficits of autism is social awareness. So if you have less social awareness, you may engage in these behaviors in a more inappropriate way. Essentially, though, the learner is positively reinforced through feeling it feels good to do some of these actions, but it also works in negative reinforcement. It removes a sensory need. So for example, if you think about like yourself, last time maybe your arm or hand fell asleep, maybe you shook it to get rid of that feeling. Function is found through identifying the most common consequence that the behavior gets. We may determine this through assessments, a functional analysis where we actually manipulate the situations to test function. This is why as an RBT, and if you do help collect data for a functional assessment, such as ABC data or narrative data, you want to be as accurate as possible to actually say what actually happened, just the facts. You don't want to say things like the person was mad or angry, because those are not factual. We can only put what we actually put, what was actually happened. Did the person get talked to afterward? Did the person gain a toy? We don't want to say they're happy, we just want to say they gained a toy. Because this is very important, because we want to correctly identify the function, because this allows us to develop a functionally equivalent response, or a FERB, a functional equivalent replacement behavior. Now, I don't want you to think that that's a technical term you're going to see everywhere. Some agencies use different terms. But the idea is that it's going to be some sort of functionally equivalent response. It allows the person to gain whatever they're looking for, whatever that's functioning as, in a more appropriate way. So in that way, we say it's functionally equivalent. A replacement behavior. A replacement behavior that allows the patient access to the need in a more appropriate way. You should always, the behavior analyst should always consider the repertoire of the learner. For example, I'm not going to expect a full phrase asking for a cookie if someone is nonverbal. I might instead have them point. Remember, we should always be teaching something in addition to ignoring problem behavior. Again, I want to reiterate that. If we're going to ignore problem behavior, we should also teach them a more appropriate way to gain access to what the behavior was functioning at. So if I'm going to ignore the screaming to get Minecraft, I also want to teach the individual how to ask more appropriately to get Minecraft. So again, a replacement behavior allows the patient access to the need in a more appropriate way. This can also be systematic. For example, I worked with someone one time who liked to throw things like staplers. Staplers, scissors, stuff like that. Of course, that's very dangerous. This particular person really liked the response that they were getting. So one of the intermediate steps when we did a replacement behavior was to get like Nerf balls so she could throw that at people. Now listen, I know it's not appropriate to throw Nerf balls at people randomly. Well, not all the time, not out of a play situation. But it is more appropriate than throwing staplers or scissors. And again, it's systematic. We wouldn't let that happen forever. Eventually, we would teach that person how to gain access to attention in a more appropriate way. But it's just an intermediate step. So here's some ideas. So for replacement behaviors for attention-seeking behaviors. One of the things I can do is teach patients jokes. This way they can get attention in a more appropriate way. Or I'll teach them a funny phrase. Might teach them how to tap on an adult's shoulder. Maybe having them ask appropriately, can you play? And as you can see, that starts to become accessed as well. An important consideration I want you to have is that it should really be functionally equivalent. I worked with a patient once who loved attention. The problem was that most of the attention he was getting was very negative. It was very stern lectures, but he liked that voice. He liked that very stern voice. So even though adults were giving him, so when I asked to give replacement behavior, whatever the replacement behavior was, they would give him attention. But the problem was the attention was not the same as the attention he was getting, the negative attention. So what we did at first was every time the behavior actually happened, the behavior that we actually wanted to see happen, the replacement behavior, we would actually give him a stern talking to because that's what he was used to. And eventually we were able to fade that out and start giving him just regular praise. The point being, though, is as an analyst, I'm looking at all of that. What the person is truly seeking. So again, this is not by any means an exhaustive list. There are several other ways that you can think of to reinforce or to have an alternative behavior to gain attention. These are just a few that I've liked to use. Replacement for escape or avoidance. We could have the person ask for a break, either through an icon or verbally. I always been told this opens up a can of worms, right? They're going to always be asking that. The point, though, is that we want to honor that, because instead of tantruming, asking is much more appropriate. Remember, as an RBT, you are there to teach several independent skills. So even though you're letting them get out of work by asking appropriately for a break, guess what? That's actually doing them a huge favor. That's actually teaching them something very important. And the point is, as a behavior analyst, I'm looking at it long term. We can eventually teach them how to wait and have longer periods of time between breaks, or give them a limit of breaks. The point is, at first, though, we're going to honor that asking for a break. Also, we could have them learn to ask for help. Help on hard items, or clarification. There's lots of different ways that we could do that. Again, these are by no means exhaustive. Here's some access to tangibles. Some replacements we might use. Have them ask appropriately. Teaching them to wait for the item they want. I've had to teach recently a person how to look for alternative items when something they wanted was not available. Or teaching them to ask, can I play with you? Or can we share this item? The point is the replacement behavior for access allows the person to access what they want in a more appropriate manner. So you might be thinking, well, how does teaching to wait do that? Well, if a person asks me for, say, like their favorite action figure, and I teach them they have to wait 5 seconds, and they actually get it, this is them actually getting it, versus if they tantrum, I might have to just withhold it. And finally, replacements for automatic or sensory. Squeezes might give the person an item with an interesting texture, like a koosh ball. Sensory activities. There's lots of different things. Our friends that are occupational therapists know a lot about this. Basically, anything that's going to address a sensory need.